Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Walker, the Executive Director at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and I'm joined by two colleagues who were the creators behind the Cowboy exhibition that's currently on view at the Amon Carter, but originated from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. And we're blessed to have both Nora Abrams, who is the Mark G. Falcone director at the Denver Contemporary, has been there for a good long stretch, 15 years, but she's packing her bag and moving to Boston to be the new executive director at the ICA, or the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, a very storied institution that has done much over the years to not only initiate, but to innovate the conversations around contemporary creativity. So good luck with that, Nora, but we're glad to have you here tonight. And then, of course, her colleague at the Denver Contemporary, Miranda Lash. Miranda is the senior curator there. Her official title is the Ellen Bruss Senior Curator. And she's been at Denver since 2020, I believe that's right, or right around 2020. So has earned her stripes as that in that position, certainly. But she's also shares another. I don't know how you do two jobs at one time, Miranda, but she is also the co-director of the Prospect 6 exhibition in New Orleans, a triennial, is that right? And
Yeah.
it opened in the fall, I believe in October. And it will, you have still a few more weeks of run, but it closes February 2nd. So congratulations on being able to juggle more than one task at a time. It certainly speaks to your expertise. But we've invited Nora and Miranda to talk to us since they created the show and they dreamt up the concept and chose the artist. We want to sort of delve in and dig in and get an insider's view as to how an exhibition like Cowboy is conceived and researched and designed and then implemented. So we'll get to that in just a second. I have one bit of business before for all of the registrants or all the participants in this webinar. We would ask you, if you have a question, that you go to the question and answer function or button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and write your question in. We don't have the ability nor the time to field questions by the raised hand button that is oftentimes a lot of fun, but we've got a lot to cover in an hour, and we want to dedicate the last 10 to 15 minutes to your questions, and we will have them all in the question and answer section. They will be visible to everybody on this webinar, so we'll be able to attend to those questions at that time. So hopefully that's clear. And if your raised hand gets dismissed, it doesn't mean we don't know you're there or care about you. It's just we would like you to use the question and answer section. So with that out of the way, I just wanted to get to the really opening question. You know, here in Fort Worth, we've stacked our identity, our origin story on the Cowboy and the interest that Amon G. Carter had, not only through his collecting, but through his support of the rodeo here and Frontier Town and all of the different kinds of Western expressions that he helped to initiate. So we were very pleased, but it's curious, how did you come to this topic yourselves of the Cowboy, and what did you hope to accomplish?
Well, I first wanted to say, before answering that question, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank your whole team, who have been just an absolute joy to work with. Thank you for bringing our exhibition to Fort Worth and presenting it so beautifully, and taking such great care with it. We have been so honored by this partnership, and just really want to say how much we're looking forward to having this conversation with you and with all of you who are joining us tonight as well. Excuse me. I'll start, and Miranda, obviously, we have a whole kind of back and forth shtick that I hope will be entertaining to everyone as we go through the conversation. But I can just kick things off by responding to your question, which is how did we come up with this exhibition concept, and what we were trying to do as Miranda was joining our team in 2020, and we were reflecting kind of what is the next kind of chapter for our exhibition program here at MCA Denver. We really wanted to make sure that the stories we were telling and maybe the histories we were surfacing were those that were quite germane and really relevant to the city and the state and the region that we find ourselves in the Mountains West here in Denver. And we kind of conceived of, in our heads, we kept calling it a trilogy of looking at three different components that really form the kind of anchors or poles for both historically and in the present tense, what anchors our kind of daily life here in this region, in this part of the country. And so the kind of figure was the cowboy. And then we have two other projects that are coming up, one that's focused on water and one that's focused on the land. And so
all looking at the West?
yes,
Oh,
looking very specifically at the Mountains West, and very specifically at Colorado. The exhibition around water will be a kind of survey of Ronnie Horn's works that are inspired by water, and in kind of pulling in programmatically a lot of conversations around the Colorado River specifically, and water rights and access to water and the precarity of water that is the daily life for many in our region. So I know I'm speaking very high level, but in terms of how we were starting to conceive of Cowboy, it was really about this commitment to telling the stories that animate the world and the culture and the community that we're in today.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. And it's so fun to be able to talk about this show in the context of the Eamon Carter. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to the Eamon Carter for hosting this conversation. It has been such a joy to build this dialogue with Nora. As she mentioned, or as you may know, the stock show is in full swing right now in Denver. Just a week ago, we had cattle driven through the streets of downtown. And so we were really fascinated by how the idea of the cowboy straddles both mythology and lived experience. So, in other words, there are lots of people in the Mountains West, as there are in the Fort Worth area, who identify as cowboys or identify strongly through family histories, through heritage, with the idea of the cowboy. At the same time, this concept has essentially, in so many ways, become conflated with American identity, or in so many ways, it's become a shorthand for talking about the traits we associate with Americanness. In other words, and by that I mean the qualities of rugged independence, virility, masculinity, strength, being entrepreneurial, having control of a situation. And we'll show you some images that embody this archetype, but because the cowboy is so closely tethered with a spirit of rugged individualism, we notice that it's no coincidence that during times of stress or duress nationally, it's resurfaced as an archetype that is almost like a salve to how we can understand American identity. And we were fascinated by the idea that from the worlds of fashion, from the worlds of pop culture, and in music, there was this idea of we're having a cowboy moment. And so you may recall the cowboy aesthetic that was widely adopted, but both by fashion logos, but also by pop stars like Beyonce, Taylor Swift, uh, some of the most
even Chapel
popular.
Roan, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And Old Town Road being one of the, highest grossing music songs in recent history. And so we were looking at not only is this a lived experience, but why is there so much fascination in cowboy mystique, cowboy culture, and fashion right now? And to do that, we decided to lean heavily into building a conversation within the realm of contemporary art. So although there is an incredibly robust discourse in Western art, as you know, as demonstrated at the Amon Carter Museum, and also as is demonstrated at the Denver Art Museum, just down the way. There's an
Sure.
incredible and beautiful floor of Western art at that museum. We wanted to supplement the conversation by looking really specifically at how artists are interpreting this icon now, and through time and conversations led to a list of 27 artists that we felt were probing the questions that felt most germane to, let's just say, the period of 2023 to now, 2025, from the time when the exhibition debuted in Denver to the Amon Carter.
That's great. That's a really, really provocative final thought on the origins and the importance of the subject that you and Nora collaborated on. Because my question is, how do you make the decisions, the choices for who you include and who you don't? Because you're constructing a narrative of some type, right? That is being driven by these individual works of art, by individual creatives that are 20, what did you say, 28, 26?
27.
Of 27, almost got there.
Right there.
Of a very large community of artists. And I'm sure a large community of artists that are touching on this subject matter in different ways. So could you talk and kind of let us know a deeper story? And I know you have a PowerPoint, or you have a presentation to share that helps to elucidate this part of making an exhibition.
Absolutely. And I think, depending on the time that you're working, we probably could have come up with 3 different checklists with very different artists. But what drove the kind of building of the checklist was really just asking some basic questions, and expressing our curiosity as to why the cowboy was figuring, to Miranda's point, in this like larger than just its historical role, or currently as a, in terms of its functional role, the functional role of the cowboy. Why was it kind of surfacing and taking on even more of a kind of sense of mythology? And so how could, something that could exist in these 2 different registers, both the lived experience as well as, kind of embodying so much import and representation and identity for so many different constituencies. It just felt like there were so many, this kernel had so much to tell us. And so we started with a kind of obvious starting point, I would say, if you're presenting a contemporary exploration of the cowboy, and that's with Richard Prince, who photographed the Marlboro Man, he rephotographed the Marlboro advertisements from the 80s and 90s, and just isolated the figure in the landscape. So isolated the image of the cowboy within the advertisement, and really brings us and kind of kicks us off with one dimension of this project, which is the kind of archetype of the cowboy, the image of the cowboy that is larger than life. And this is a work that's all about images. It's all about surface. It's a rephotograph of a photograph that is trying to sell you something. So it is not even, it's all quite staged to begin with. And so in the rephotographing of the image, it obviously creates a bit of distance, and intentionally so. It's quite grainy. It's not crisp. It's not, it's not sharp. It's kind of fuzzy and hazy. In that way, it's kind of suggestive of a memory. And in doing so, really kind of nestles in our own memories of what we might have imagined or continue to imagine a cowboy to be. So it's really engaging with the representation of the cowboy in popular culture, kind of writ large, whether that's Hollywood, whether that's through advertising in other capacities. But the whole kind of performance or artifice that really gets to what Miranda was saying, to capture the kind of essence or the character of the cowboy without really specifying it to a single individual. And so this is one line of inquiry that kind of courses through the exhibition, is the ways in which we've absorbed these images of the cowboy, almost reinterpreting them to be accurate and real and factual, when in reality they're quite manufactured. And so getting at the ways in which we've been seduced by them visually and otherwise to believe them to be real, and how that has seeped in. And it's a counterpoint to many of the other works in the exhibition, which are really narrating and bringing to life the real experiences of those who work with animals, who maintain the land, who work in an agricultural capacity, which is to say that the real hard, difficult work that is done daily and has been for hundreds of years. So getting at that duality was something that really drove our building of the checklist, but it really came from, in many ways, the artists themselves. Now, obviously, we're well familiar as contemporary art curators, we're well familiar with this image by Richard Prince, so that part we'll take credit for. But so many of the works in the exhibition and the artists that we ended up including were through conversations with other artists who are also in the exhibition, or other artists in our network. Like, you kind of put out the bat signal that you're doing a project on this massive topic, and it's hard to know like what threads to pull. But through conversations with many artists, I would say, is how we were introduced to other works and other artists that we otherwise maybe wouldn't have been on our radar.
I think that's right. And yes, I agree with Nora wholeheartedly that we could have made 15 versions of this show, just given the quantity of Western art that is out there in the world. But we did take a very intentional approach of selecting artworks that raise questions, or perhaps may raise as many questions as they do answers. So arguably, every work of art has a narrative to it. And I think some works of art lean more towards the expository, in other words, in a very straightforward way, saying this is the story that's at stake. And other artworks lean more towards the inquiry side, like what is the story and why this story? And this show definitely, because this show is probing the cowboy almost as a question, like, what is a cowboy now? How do we think about the cowboy? Every single artwork in this show, almost like different facets of the jewel, probe a different question, whether the question is, why do we see the mythology in this way? Or how does this artwork supplement our understanding of the lived experience of cowboys?
So when I know here at the Carter, we started with the prints with Richard Prince, this photograph or this chromogenic print, and Luis Jimenez work called Rodeo Girl. I think that's the right title.
Rodeo Queen.
Rodeo Queen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Even more precise. And they're both, I would say, from my perspective anyway, more historic, even though they're not that. Their production is within certainly our lifetimes. But was that intentional? I mean, we did it that way, but was that sort of intentional in a way that you wanted to use this kind of contrast of imagery as a transition from the mythic to the real?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, I think Nora, from day one, we talked about you have to kick off with Richard Prince, right? This was
it's like the work has, even though it's about it's talking about the power of that advertisement. I think it's been digested art historically so much that like it is the thing that people, I would say, in our world kind of think of first when you say contemporary art that's about the cowboy. It's going to be this picture.
Yeah. So it would be, I was, who was popping into my head, who's still alive, of course, but very near and dear to Texas, was Ed Ruscha. and his exploration of the West. I don't have the kind of encyclopedic brain to know if he tackled this topic, but was he ever a consideration?
Many of his contemporaries were, and you're right, he did some great pieces about the West, these text pieces, and he could have easily been in the show. We ended up including a work by John Baldessari, which from his series The Space Between. And the particular work we have is The Space Between a Hat, a Rock, and the Shadow. I don't think we included that particular slide, but I'm going to take a quick look just to see if we have it. We included John Baldessari and Andy Warhol essentially to acknowledge that this is a topic that has been taken on conceptually for many decades, far preceding this show. And so the oldest work in the exhibition is Horse by Andy Warhol from 1963. And we included The Space Between is actually John Baldessari's last series that he created before his death. But we found it fascinating that he was probing essentially what is the minimal amount of information that you need to conjure the idea of the cowboy. So all you need is a hat, a rock, and a shadow. And
Wow.
that's enough to fill in the idea of a Western narrative.
You're transported to Midland, in the great film Giant, right? Just with those three elements. That's fascinating. So, well, and also the one of my favorite works, if I can do that here in the show, is Mel Chin's work, which is a saddle constructed of barbed wire. Now, what drew you to that particular work? I mean, Mel is also a well-established creative, where you also have emergent artists and mid-career and blah 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 in the exhibition. But Mel certainly resonates as someone well known. Sorry, I interrupted you. Please,
No.
why this object?
Yeah, I'll let Nora chime in as well. But Mel is such a special artist, Texas native, born and raised in Houston, and so very steeped in Western culture. At the same time, has for years integrated his own identity as a Chinese American into his work. And he's really a master at using material and medium to look at different conceptual and historical angles on things. So in Rough Rider, there's layers of references to Texas history. There's first going all the way back to the colonization of Texas territory by the Spanish. And he talks about how that abrasive texture of the barbed wire evoking the crown of thorns associated with Jesus Christ as an allusion to that initial Catholic colonization of Texas.
Oh,
Then the phrase Rough Rider is so deeply associated with Buffalo Bill and the Rough Riders. And so it has this literal interpretation in that if you were to jump on a saddle of barbed wire, it would be a rough ride. But also conjuring that history of, the mythos of Buffalo Bill, and also the ultimately the demise of the cowboy as roaming the open range through the inclusion of barbed wire and the pivotal role that barbed wire played in the closure of the West. And then because every detail is intentional with Mel, you see that the stand itself for the saddle is shaped in a horseshoe-like shape, almost like a branding iron that the saddle sits on top. It's actually based off a Texan's personal roping saddle. So it has a tether to reality. And Nora, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, I just want to say that one of the great things about working with Miranda Lash is that she is the foremost expert on Mel Chin, having organized his retrospective several years ago. And so I had no idea this work even existed. Miranda, in our early conversations, said, "Oh, well, I think we should include this work by Mel." And this is one of those works where you don't have to know anything and you just totally get it, and it's rich and it's layered and it's so powerful, and it says so much by being so kind of direct about what it is, what it's made of. et cetera. But it's not a one note, kind of experience. It unfurls as you spend time with it. And what was shocking to me was when Miranda shared with me that it had never been shown in a public institution before
Oh
our
my
show.
gosh.
I
It's
know.
hard to imagine that.
I know. This is why one of the great reasons to always work with Miranda Lash, because you get these nuggets, and you have no idea how revelatory they are. And so, if you think about it, the way we had organized it in Denver, and it's not dissimilar from how it is in Fort Worth, was we had this work in very close proximity to the Richard Prince photograph, really kind of acknowledging that there are going to be these two kind of thematic kind of lines of inquiry coursing through the exhibition. One is really engaging with the power of the myth, and the other is really engaging with the history. The history of this figure is the history of our country, and it's very much the history of our region specifically out here.
That's so interesting because even the irony of the title or the pun of the title or whatever the right word is, but there's a kind of bridge to the lived experience, because a rough ride was part of the mythos, but also, as you were just indicating, all of the hard work that happens daily is manual and physical. And this, to me, when I saw it, that's the imagery that I came to. But what's also kind of fun is, at the Carter anyway, one of my favorite, but also one of his favorite and important works by Remington is called The Fall of the Cowboy, which is the actual the subject matter is largely that the introduction of barbed wire into the historic segregation of the land changed the way that cowboys worked and lived. And I like that. It's interesting that you have that kind of narrative, but Mel Chin has taken it literally.
Yeah.
Because it's, not painted, right? It's not painted barbed wire, it's barbed wire.
Right. It's much more in your face in that way.
Yes.
I won't say confrontational, but it's unavoidable.
Yes, that's a good word.
It's always really enjoyable to watch visitors approaching it and watching them have that moment of realization of what they're looking at. Because from a distance, it looks just very intricate, and maybe it's unclear what the material is. And then they get up close and they immediately instinctively grab their tush because they can't imagine.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. I observed it with several friends that I gave tours to.
Well, what? The word that pops into my mind, and maybe this is a quality, Miranda, you can confirm, of Mel Chin in general, but it feels very authentic.
Yeah, it's so much of his work is based off incredible deep research. That's why he's a MacArthur Fellow. That's why he's got that edge. But I love that his works always have more than one angle. They're always so multidimensional.
Well, so bridging that, moving from, maybe artists that you were familiar with, what was the experience working with artists that you were unfamiliar with, but you discovered along this journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it was, I was just going to say, I think that what we enjoyed so much, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think I can get away with it on this point, is that we learned so much, not just about the artists and their practice, but we also learned through their research. So much of the work that's in the exhibition, even though it's made within the last 5 to 10 years for the most part, oftentimes they're really referencing and referring back to historical episodes that happened many, many years prior. And so seizing on these moments of history and pulling them forward into the present, there's just so much that we learned along the way. And so our curiosity kept getting fueled by these conversations and by these spending time in studio visits and visiting with the artists to understand what were the stories that they wanted to pull forward and how are they going about that. And I think there are a number of examples. Otis Kwame Kwaku is an artist. He's a Ghanaian artist. He's based in Portland now. He does these incredibly vivid and kind of regal almost portraits of friends and family members as cowboys. And he's really, he grew up in Ghana, and he devoured American culture primarily watching Westerns on TNT that, was available when, and that's what he watched. And he just always understood that cowboys were white, and he never saw a cowboy of any other background. And so coming to the US, however many years later, and living in the US during the protests after George Floyd's murder, and seeing the Compton Cowboys, which is an urban cowboy crew out of LA, marching in the streets and being a part of these protests on horses and in their, in their clothing and hats and all the things. It blew his mind. He had never seen anyone like him embodying authentically, especially that role. And so then he went on his own deep dive into the history of the Black cowboy, which I know many are well familiar with. But I think that in certain parts of I don't want to overly generalize. I don't know that it is as widely and commonplace, widely known and as commonplace, that the cowboy has always been a far more diverse figure than we are witness to through popular culture and Hollywood especially. And so for him, it was this like earth-shattering moment, and something that clearly has really fueled his creative practice. And here we have a contemporary cowboy. He's kind of brought him into the modern day with the Adidas logo and the earrings and the smartwatch. But he has, in many ways, also that he's looking askance, lost in his own thoughts. He's alone in a landscape that's pretty deserted. There's a lot of attributes that aren't so dissimilar from that kind of classic archetypal image of a cowboy that, I think we've all kind of become so familiar with. So I think being introduced to him and how he got to where he is was an example of, I think, the kind of learning that we did along the way.
So, and Miranda, is there an experience or an engagement with a living artist new to you in this project that you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many. This was the first occasion that Nora and I had worked with Rafa Esparza, and so much of the decision to engage with Rafa for me was motivated by the fact that, I grew up seeing uncles and cousins come to family gatherings wearing cowboy hats and loving norteño music, but I was never raised to think of them as like they call themselves at best vaqueros, but not cowboys. Just showing an image of Rafa's work here, and really wanting to probe like why, and Rafa and I talked about this. When you see when a cowboy hat is worn by someone who, presents as white, they're seen as embodying the American ideal. But often when you see someone who's presents as brown wearing a cowboy hat, they might be seen as a recent arrival or not acculturated, because cowboy hats, for so many Mexican Americans, Central Americans, folks coming from Latin America, it's a functional tool for either working with cattle or animals or working the fields. It's functional for protection from the sun. So we talked about, Rafa and Esparza and I, who is associated with the idea of the cowboy and in what ways, and also about the associations we have with masculinity, and very specifically straight masculinity, with the idea of the cowboy. So as part of this engagement, I will say, Rafa previously had not made work a body of work specifically about cowboys, but he had made this incredible painting on Adobe that you see in the background of this installation. And it's called Al Tempo, which is an homage to a queer club in Los Angeles. And one of only 3 clubs that he was aware of in the US where queer couples could dance to norteño music, as couples wearing cowboy hats and experience and in a place of safety. So Nora and I approached him about, would you like to build upon this work, Al Tempo, and create a new installation for this exhibition that really expands upon this idea of queer norteño culture? And because Rafa's practice so often is about inviting collaborators and drawing others into the practice, he collaborated with this incredible photographer, Fabian Guerrero, who is based right outside Fort Worth, and I know has a public program coming up with the Eamon Carter. And also, he has an incredible long-time studio manager, Yomara Gonzalez, who also worked with him on the frames and many aspects of this. And together, they created a film, which is shot actually largely outside Fort Worth at a queer club there, Los Reiles, and shows queer couples dancing and sort of this deconstructed version of norteño music where you can hear guitars, you can tell that there's a norteño derivative, but sort of broken down and slowed down. So you can also hear personal narratives from individuals and sort of, in a way, probe what makes cowboy identity in this context. Probably the most striking feature about this installation is the Adobe floor. So this is a hand-mixed Adobe floor that, again, part of his ongoing practice traces back to has his father being an Adobe brick maker and including actual Adobe and the making of Adobe and incorporating it into the installation. So for this presentation, we learned how to source clay materials, clay and soil, or local horse dung, hay, we're given a recipe for how to make the Adobe. We had to learn how to make it safe for a museum presentation, which involved freezing all the components to kill any vermin or bacteria or insects, and then mixing it on site. And the final and I think most poetic element to the presentation was that as before the Adobe had completely dried, Fabian and Rafa danced on the center of the floor together, and so the Adobe captures a moment of connection between the two of them. And as you can see, there's this center area where the floor is mashed up and disturbed. It's the same at the Eamon Carter, and they leave their boots behind, sort of to mark their physical presence within the space.
That's great. That's a wonderful story. Thank you. I know I have a list, but I want to be attentive to time. But I can't not ask you about the inclusion of Stephanie Siduko's work in this project, because I think you discovered at least this quality of her work. I know she's very, very, very well known, but this from a commission that happened at the Eamon Carter.
Yeah, well, this is another example. We put the bat signal out into the world, and we learned from Maggie Adler about this project, and we were so enamored with it because it's such first of all, it's a beautiful, installation, and it also calls out the institution, the institution of the museum, for its role in perpetuating a lot of the mythology that we're talking about in terms of who a cowboy is and who can be a cowboy. And it's such a smart, thoughtful, I think, way of approach to kind of doing that. It's not so severe or harsh. It really is looking at the apparatus of the institution and how all these things that we do to keep an object safe, to keep things organized, the archive, things that are so foundational to museum practice, but how that has been, a part of perpetuating some of the the narratives around the cowboy, some of which are historically accurate and some of which are fraught. And to acknowledge the museum's role in that. Obviously, institutional critique is a very contemporary, kind of approach to art making. And I think it's one that continues to be so relevant as museums themselves are, kind of, we're becoming a lot more self-aware, let's just say, as institutions. And so this was a work that kind of talked about all of that, but did so in a very beautiful and engrossing way. And I can't tell you how many visitors I took through, on tours or what have you. And we came to our presentation of this work. And so many said like, oh, I think I know someone who has one, like a maquette of that in their office, or, there was so much attachment to these sculptures here in Denver. And I think that's when we felt, oh yeah, we really, this is a work that felt so, I know it was obviously commissioned by the Amon Carter, and it's highly relevant and specific to Fort Worth, but it also had so much specificity in Denver. And I don't know that we were anticipating that reaction as much, but it made us feel so, I think, so the logic behind why we chose it felt very validated. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
No, I hadn't really thought of it as an institutional critique, which is so intriguing, Nora. So thank you for that wisdom. But it's interesting because even the way you described it as well is that the aesthetic qualities are so kind of, what's the word I want? They're so magical that the critique is not, you have to pause and really think about it, but you can also enjoy it in a way that doesn't necessarily get at the critique, if you know what I mean. Yeah. It's so intriguing because it is what we do every day as a museum, which is, often present problematic works in such a beautiful context that it's not always self-evident in that manner. So I have to ask, it also raises a question for me, in that we at the Carter, which is different for y'all in Denver, or at least at the Contemporary, we have adjacent to the exhibition, galleries that have historically sort of traditional representation that may actually be part of the beginning of the myth, that became storied in Hollywood and otherwise in the 20th century in the core collection of Remington and Russell. Would you, just sort of comment on that a little bit about how context and audience is always changeable when venues are multiple for a project, that you cooked up thinking about your audiences?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We profoundly enjoyed visiting the collection of Remingtons while we were at the Amon Carter, and it feels like such a privilege to show this work in proximity to the actual Remington sculptures. I think we so enjoyed absorbing the content there, and I know the Amon Carter does an incredible job contextualizing Remington's work, which in so many ways offers homage to to life in the West, and yet also, it has its own embellishments and romanticizations around this. So for us, it felt like, in a way, just an expansion of a conversation that you were already having. You have this robust collection that probes this pivotal part of American psyche and American history. And in a way, it felt like we're adding sort of an addendum or an update to how do we absorb this history now? What legacies does it have? And also what can we learn from and grow from, and what do we need to adjust and revise as we move forward?
I think also, I totally agree, of course, with what Miranda shared. And I think we were so excited for the exhibition to have this different experience because we are a non-collecting museum. We only show contemporary art. it felt like such a gift to be able to nestle this show within this incredible history as told through the objects in the other galleries, that kind of could create these longer conversations. And so I think in so many ways, we always hoped that it would be able to travel to a museum like the Carter, because there was so much additional context that the collection could provide that we would never have been able to provide in our own galleries. So to see it have this whole other life, very different, in many ways, very different life because of that connection, it feels like it's such a meaningful next chapter.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think we always are very attentive in our in our contemporary work of the historic connections and importance in that regard. And that has really fueled one of our contemporary, consistently contemporary programs in what we call the Sloping Gallery, where Stephanie's work showed. Because, the invitation is often to think about the collection in the context of your own creativity. And so the artists that have moved through that space have always had a reference point to a work of art that is more classically historic in the American tradition. So we're grateful. We're grateful to have had that opportunity. I wanted to let everybody know that it's time for the question period. So if you haven't written out your question yet, please do. And we'll do this fairly dynamically as they appear. But we do have one question that has been submitted first, which is, why was it important to the curatorial team, the two of you, to include a range of media in the show, from photography and works on paper to sculpture and textiles? And even performance, right? I mean,
yeah.
Greg Deal's work is an object, but it's only manifests in its meaning when he performs in it.
Absolutely. I think it wasn't necessarily a deliberate attempt to have that kind of diversity of media. It was really following the artists and what they were working with and what they were working on. I mean, you have Nathan Young, whose installation is formed from all these kind of personal objects that he and family members have collected and preserved over many years that tell a very specific history that is not as widely known. And so, that arrangement is obviously extremely bespoke and also very much just his practice, versus Otis, who, is obviously a figurative painter. I think we set out to follow the artists and the objects, and what we landed on was something that we were like, wow, we didn't expect that ourselves. I think we thought initially there was going to be a ton of video, right, Miranda? Wasn't that
We did,
thought
yeah.
at some phase?
Yeah, and we had to be selective about how many videos we could include, because we've all been through shows where there's more video than you can take through in a single visit. So yeah, I agree with you, Nora. It was very much an after effect of just looking at a wide diversity of work.
That's great. Another inquiring mind wants to know, do you think artists will continue to explore the image of the cowboy in the years to come?
100%.
Yes. Absolutely.
Have you seen the show? I'll follow up because it raised a question. That question, thank you, questioner, raised a question for me, which is,
we're hanging on every word, Andrew. Looks like he froze.
I think there's.
Have you established more lasting relationships with some of the artists that you've engaged for the first time?
Andrew, we missed like 30 seconds of what you said just before that last part. Would you mind repeating?
Oh yeah, sure. The two questions really that lead off of, will this continue? One is, have you seen an impact? In other words, have you seen the Cowboy show be either an influence or an innovation for artists that you've since seen, artworks that you've since seen? And secondly, have any of the artists that you met through this project continued to develop relationships with the Contemporary at Denver?
Yeah.
Good.
So it's amazing how like the minute we opened the show, there were dozens of more possibilities that pop forward to us that could have been included. There's such an incredible, even at one of your neighboring institutions, we loved the exhibition of photography of Mexican female rodeo riders at the Cowgirl Museum. That was
Oh,
so
yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
There's just so many ways to address this topic. Something I love about MCA Denver is because we spend so much time working with artists directly, commissioning new work, it often develops into these wonderful extended dialogues. For me, there were two artists that I did pull over to prospect after working with them on Cowboy, Rafa Esparza and Stephanie Sujuko, and Melchin, actually three. But I think for us at MCA, it's always an ongoing conversation once we've engaged deeply with artists. So we always consider them part of the family, so to speak.
Yeah.
As a director at a traditionally historical museum, it is always interesting to see what tools you develop in your individual practice. And I've always admired the contemporary world because you get to it's about relationship. And it's about listening and asking questions, and I value all of those in issues of leadership, but it doesn't always, when you're studying Thomas Moran, it doesn't always enter your daily life. So thank you for sharing that, Miranda. There are a couple more questions that have come up. One is for each of you, Miranda and Nora. Which work you knew this was coming, which work is your favorite in the exhibition, and how do you think it fits within or pushes against the broader conception of the American cowboy?
Well, we are never allowed to choose our favorite child, so you will not hear those words from our lips. I would say one work that that was oh gosh, there's so many actually. One work I'll just call out because he is a friend, and it kind of gets to what you were sharing before, Andrew, in terms of relationships. I knew of Carl Handel's series of large-scale drawings of female writers, and he started that series back in 2017 or 18 after spending time in Denver because he had been a part of a group show at MCA Denver. And after he was done installing, he went to the Denver Art Museum and he saw their storied collection of Western art. And he was enthralled by those paintings, especially, but also noticed that there were no women featured in for the most part, in any of those scenes. And so he wanted to kind of respond to that historical record by centering these, kind of tough and bold and heroic female writers. And so he spent a lot of time traveling through Central California. He's based in LA. He's okay. And studying them and taking their photographs. And so he did a whole series of these writers. And I knew of them and I loved them. And so we asked him if we could borrow one. And he said, they're all kind of owned by private collections and it's hard to get them. Why don't I just make a new one for you? And in fact, I'm going to make two. And we didn't even ask him to do that. He just wanted to make two new works for this project. And I think that is a reflection of, the trust, the longer term relationship. Not to say that, we've known each other forever. We haven't. I don't want to misrepresent, but he was so excited to be a part of this project that he wanted to create something new and he wanted to, put something into dialogue with the rest of the works on view, as well as with the works that were down the road at the Denver Art Museum. So it was a wonderful dialogue that was fomented, again, because of that relationship.
I think, I'm going to be vulnerable here. and admit that at the rodeo that I go to every year here in Fort Worth, the Stock Show and Rodeo, my favorite event is always the barrel racing.
Yeah.
Traditionally,
They're awesome.
I know. But it also problematizes the idea of a cowboy as being
Mhm.
gendered because it's clearly the life, the responsibility, the rugged engagement with the land and its resources is something that women have participated in. So it's another myth buster in a way.
Yeah.
Well, we have one last question, which is fitting, I think, because I didn't get to this, and I think this will be an easy one. Are there supplemental materials that this individual can explore if they want to learn more on this topic and further connect with the exhibition?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna make a pitch for the catalog, obviously.
I hope everyone can see it. With my green screen, it's a little hard, but yes.
Go right to the Avon Carter gift shop and buy yourself a catalog. Yeah, I think that we felt so proud of putting that book together. There are multiple essays. Miranda has an amazing interview with Rafa. So there's a lot of different types of text that's included. And it's a way of I think moving through the exhibition, even if you can't be there in person.
Yeah,
That's
and I would
great.
just
Well, oh, go ahead, Miranda. I'm
Oh, I
sorry.
would just add, we use Bloomberg Connects, which is an app that is, free to download. And if you can find the exhibition on Bloomberg Connects, and I love that we always do a lot of audio guide content with the artists. So if there are specific artists you're interested in, you can also look on Bloomberg Connects and hear from the artists themselves about the exhibition.
That's great. Again, that's Bloomberg Connects. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Great. So seek that out, and we have the catalog at the Carter, of course, and it is a critically acclaimed book, as I understand it. So congratulations on the success of that. Somewhat independent of the exhibition because
Thank you.
books last longer in a way. Well, thank you. I can't express the appreciation of the Carter for your creativity and also your willingness tonight to kind of pull back the curtain on how exhibitions come to be and why it's important to think critically about artists who are working today because they have so much to say. I think it's also notable, or should be noted this evening, that we are all in the industry right now, very much thinking about LA and the impact it has had on the art world and studios and artists' homes. There are a lot of artists in LA, and it is one of the great centers of creativity. And it's been heartbreaking to see the apocalyptic devastation that the city has endured over the last couple of weeks. I also do want to end by plugging. I think it's great to know that there's the interview with Rafa in the catalog that Miranda directed, and that the Amon Carter will be hosting on February 1st of 2025. That's a Saturday, a free lecture and conversation with 5 of the contemporary artists featured in the exhibition. Rumi Roth and Emmanuel David will be speaking together about their piece. Fabian Guerrero and Rafa Esparza will also be there. So we're grateful for that. And R. Alan Brooks as well, who was one of the authors, right, Miranda,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
book? So all the more reason to get yourself a copy and read it before February 1st. But our gratitude from Fort Worth. Good luck with your rodeo, and it will come to the rodeo. Will as soon as yours ends, it'll start up here in Fort Worth. So we will be celebrating the Cowboy in so many different ways.
Well, we have so much gratitude to you, Andrew, and your whole team. Thank you to everyone who participated in this tonight. It's such a joy to be able to spend time on this topic, and obviously with Miranda. We could talk about it for hours. So we appreciate the opportunity more than we could ever say. So thank you.
Well, thank you both, and congratulations on a great catalog and a great exhibition.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
everyone, enjoy